Hi there, welcome to this refurbishment project where we're bringing back to life a lovely old Keil Kraft Bantam. Now the Keil Kraft Bantam came out in 1955 and it had a 39-inch wingspan. Now this is a much enlarged version of that with a 60-inch wingspan. And I picked it up recently. It's a lovely old model and I thought I've just got to get this back in the air. Now, up till now, we've stripped the fuselage. I think you can see that there just on camera. And we've got the tailplane, we've got the wings stripped. We've cleaned up the engine and got that running. I've strengthened the wing. And as you can see in the last video, I got the wing covered in 38 micron laminating film, which went on really, really nice. And now in this video, I want to start to get this covered. I've still got work to do on the other pieces, but I thought it'd be nice to do a little bit of covering now we've got the wing cleaned up, strengthened, and so that's what we're doing today. As you can see, and as I said, we've got the laminating film on, so I'm going to put on two different tissues. Now this is quite a large sheeted tissue, which is good because hopefully we can get the wings done without, it's quite big sheets, we can get the wing done without any joins along the actual structure. We're going to need to have some joins in the middle, which is fine, but if I can avoid it, I don't want to have any joins here because they always show. And so yeah. So I've got this blue and I've got this green. This is a recycled tissue that I got off eBay, really, really cheap, but it's got wet strength. And the dark colours are quite nice. This is a kind of a test piece I've done. Quite like to just test it and see how it behaves. The lightest tissue of this I used on and the black I used on my Keil Kraft Gypsy. The black was lovely. The lighter colours aren't quite so nice. They end up a little bit mottledy. So anyway, what design are we going to do? Well, we're going to have a solid colour all the way on the bottom, no variation. And I think I'm going to use the blue for that. So we're going to do the whole underside in blue. And we're going to have a join here, which we don't care what it looks like because it's going to sit on the fuselage. So we'll probably have a decent overlap, if we can, with the size of this tissue. And then on the top, we're going to have the blue at the back sweeping down and the green sort of on the front coming up like that. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to make some templates and cut out some tissue to do this top surface so I can just get an idea in my mind of how it's going to look. And then once we've got that done, I'm going to start the actual covering itself, and I'll start on the underside and I'll get this blue done on the underside. And we'll have a look at that in detail, the actual process. I know I've covered this in other videos, but it would be good just to go over it again, what I think is the best way to put this on. And this tissue does go on absolutely lovely. And just a word to say that the reason we've got the laminating film on is because it adds a lot of strength to the covering, a lot of puncture resistance, just makes it more resilient. Whereas we then put the tissue on because we want it to look like a lovely vintage model. We don't want a shiny plastic finish. We want that vintage look. So anyway, I will start to get some of this trimmed up and ready for covering. Right, well, I've got my wing laid out on a piece of fairly thick paper, and I've drawn a line here on the paper all the way across showing the centre line of the wing. Got a beanbag on there just to hold this down, and now I'm just going to run round with a pencil, and it doesn't need to be hugely accurate, but just to give an idea of the outline of the wing. And then what we can do is we can then cut out the tissue plan that we're going to use or design. So I'll just run that around the tip. There we go. Oops, a little bit wide on that bottom edge, but that doesn't matter. So now we've got, don't know whether that shows up on the camera, hopefully it does, but now we've got the rough shape of the wing, and we can draw in the design, which I'm going to do, and I'm roughly going to have blue on this back half, and then I'm going to have a narrow piece or a piece of green that essentially comes down from a line like this and sweeps down and curves around like that. But I'm going to draw that out, which will probably take several goes to get it to look right, and then I'm going to use a scalpel and I'm going to cut this in two, and then we can use these as a template for cutting the tissue. And we're going to need to cut the tissue fairly carefully. There doesn't seem to be a grain on the tissue I'm using, but I might use it from corner to corner just so we can get this in one piece, because I don't want to have to do a seam halfway. So anyway, I'll get on and get this cut out. Right, I've got my two templates now. I've got my blue and I've got my green. Now I'm going to place these on top of the tissue that I've got and cut them out, but I'm going to cut them out with about a 5mm overlap on the blue. The blue's going on the underside of the wing, and then we're going to put the green on top. And rather than just cutting them to the size of the template and then putting it over, what I would rather do is cut a little bit extra. You just get a better fit of the curve. So I will get those cut up, the tissue cut up, and then we'll have a look. Right, you can see I've got the tissue laid out. I've ironed it just to get some of the major creases out of it. I mean, they will just fall out once it gets wet and I start putting it on. Now you can see I've put the template at an angle. I've skewed it so I can get a whole piece out of here without a join, and I can turn it and flip it over, turn it round, and I can get another whole piece out of here for the other side of the wing. Now I'm quite happy doing this because there's no grain in the tissue. Or none apparent grain that I can see. If it was something like my Japanese Asuka tissue, where there's a very definite grain, I would feel very uncomfortable about doing this because it may not look right on the plane itself. There it would be nice to keep the grain, well, going down the wing nicely straight. So anyway, this should hopefully be okay, and now is certainly not the time to skimp on scalpel blades. So I'll put a brand new scalpel blade in here, and I'm going to cut this now, and hopefully we will get a nice piece of tissue. And as I said, I'm just going to add about 5mm onto here, and so what, 3/16, something like that, and that will just have a little bit of an overlap between the two tissues, and it will be a little bit darker. We'll see that dark seam where the tissue doubles up, but it's very difficult to avoid that really. The only other way would be to put the green on top of the blue, which you could do, but it kind of takes the colour out of the green. It looks a little bit muddy, doesn't look quite as vibrant. So there we go, we've got that done now, and that should be fine. I just need to finish trimming up here because I deliberately didn't start at the edge because I didn't want it sort of pulling. Right, let's get that off there. Now that cut really nice, and as I said, because we've got a really nice sharp scalpel, look at that, lovely. So now, hopefully, if we just pull the wing across, I'm not sure whether this is a good idea because we're a bit tight on room, but that will now go like that. There we go. And so we'll cut the green for the top now, and then we can think about getting this on. Actually, I'll trim up this this side as well, the bottom edge, because we've got a lot of stuff on here that we don't need that will just cause us problems. Look, there's quite a big overhang there, so I'll do that first. Right, we're ready to start putting this tissue on, and like I said, we're going to put solid blue on the underside. So to start with, I've got the wing nicely supported and fairly solid. I've got a blanket, sorry, not a blanket, a towel on this end just supporting it. I've got towels underneath here. Now I've got the tissue cut generously. Could do with being a little bit longer, but we'll get away with it. And I'm going to line this cut edge up here with the very centre line, and I think it'll probably expand a little bit when it gets wet and just come over that centre line. But if not, that's fine. We can just put a strip down to fill the gap in the end, because at the end of the day this is under the fuselage. I want to make sure I've got enough at this end just to tuck that under, which I'm sure I will have. Now I've got a nice straight cut edge on this front edge here, and I'm going to try and line that up so it just wraps under the or around the leading edge just the right amount, so I don't have to trim it. Because and really, if the leading edge is if the leading edge is curved like that, I want to bring it sort of from the bottom up and just slightly over the center point, and then the top covering will come down and just slightly over that to the midpoint. That is kind of the plan. So we'll just line this up carefully. I mean, we may well need to pick this up and move it once we get it wet. Now I've got a bean bag here, which I find really useful actually, because it just stops things moving, and if I put that on there, that really holds up quite nicely. And I've then just got to line up this end, and I think we are about there with that, maybe just a little bit more. Now I'm going to be spraying this with water. You've already seen my water sprayer. I've got a couple of brushes, quite soft brushes. I'm going to be using the bigger brush just to move the water around once I've sprayed and get out all the bubbles, get this nice and flat. Probably need to pick it up and put it back down again. Hopefully I don't have to do that too much, because I don't want to test the wet strength of this tissue. Once we've got this all wet, I'm going to leave it, make sure it expands, normalizes, and then I'm going to dab it with kitchen roll to get as much of the water out as possible, so it's just damp and stuck to the laminating film. And then I'm going to be using a water-based polyurethane. Now this is a Wix product which you can't get anymore, but it's just a generic water-based polyurethane. I'm actually going to be using clear gloss, but that's because I've got quite a lot of gloss, and the second and final coats will be either silk or matte, I'm not sure, but because I don't want a gloss finish, but it's okay to use for this process. So I think now, just check that front edge again, I think we can get this sprayed. And I'm going to start here. Let's move that now, don't want to get my beanbag too wet. You can see this is really wrinkling up, and I think this tissue will expand quite a lot. And if we get it really wet, it kind of helps with it floating, and it's not a problem because we'll dampen it down, we'll dab it down to get most of the water out once we've got it in place and we're happy with it. Now I'm just going to lift this up. Just pull it a little bit to try and get as much of the bubbles out as we can. Now I'm obviously lifting it up from that side because I don't want to alter the amount I've got hanging over the front edge. I mean, if it changes a little bit, it's no big deal, but I'd rather not. Now, just want to pull this back a little bit, and just a little bit here again. It's always a real balance. I've just ripped it a little bit there. It's always a balance, I was just about to say, as to how much you pull this, because you really don't want to test the wet strength too to destruction, but we're getting there. That's what I need to do now, is just carefully get out all of these wrinkles and let it just sit a while and just make sure it's stopped expanding. But you can see that there, we're getting these wrinkles out, and you know, we are going to have to lift it up again. We are going to have to add a little bit more water. And I guess one of the good things about starting on the underside is that, you know, if it's if you're doing this for the first time and it doesn't look quite as good as you would perhaps like, it's not the end of the world. You can just slide it a little bit with your fingers as well, like this. But you can see that putting on more water has actually helped this to move a little bit. So I'm going to carry on working this and getting all the wrinkles out, and then we'll have a look before we dab it and start putting the polyurethane on. But we are getting there. You just have to have a little bit of patience and be delicate with it. Right, well, I've smoothed that out. There's a little bit of a crease here, but if I try to work that, I'm just going to damage the tissue. So I haven't dabbed it yet. There's a little bit of a water bubble there. But what we're going to do now is just dab this with some kitchen roll and get off as much of the water as we can. Now, we need to be careful here, because if we put this on like this, that's fine. But when we lift it up, we need to lift it up from this direction. If we lift it up from here, we're likely to lift the tissue with it, or we possibly can. I have done in the past. And we need to move this tissue as little as possible, because it doesn't have the water strength of the Japanese tissue that I've used, and it makes you appreciate that, but it isn't a bad tissue. So we'll get on and do this carefully. And now what we're going to do is we're going to brush on the polyurethane. And with all of this, because this tissue is not good quality Japanese tissue, we need to be brushing this on quite gently. So all we're going to do, plenty of polyurethane, and just brush it through and let it soak in. And I'm going to do it over the edge here, on the bit that we're going to trim. And we want to make sure this trailing edge is stuck on nicely. So I'm putting plenty of polyurethane on at the moment, and I will just brush it and thin it out like this. But that now is looking quite nice, because we want it to soak through enough on this damp tissue that that it gets a good bond. And it does bond really well. Despite this laminating film being gloss, it is really hard to get the tissue off. I've done this with silk as well, and silk works. It doesn't bond quite as well with silk, and silk doesn't bond quite as well to itself with the polyurethane, but it does work, and it does do a nice job. And hopefully you've seen my Model L build where I've used silk and just this technique. It's in my playlist anyway. So I'll carry on getting this done, and then we'll have a look when we've got it all finished. Right, well, I've got the polyurethane on this, and it's all looking really nice. You can still see a little bit of a crease mark here, but I think as this dries, that will hopefully disappear. If not, well, it doesn't. I've put on quite a lot of polyurethane. I mean, I haven't absolutely drenched it, but I've put a decent amount on because I want to make sure that this sticks and it soaks through, and it's also going to be slightly diluted because of the water. And the next 2 coats I put on, because I will put 2 more coats on, I will put on a lot thinner than this. I will just literally give it a touch. So, and now it looks like we can go walk away and leave this, but I would suggest that you don't. I would suggest that you keep an eye on it, because sometimes we get bubbles forming, sometimes we get creases for me and just little pockets for me. So the best thing we can do now is just keep an eye on this and make sure that it doesn't move, it doesn't go anywhere. And I don't know why, but sometimes you do get little bubbles that that form under it, and I think it's where people just walk away and leave it and haven't kept an eye on it really. So I'm just going to keep watching this now, and I'll probably just keep just touching it with a brush in certain areas just to make sure it's looking right. But this should take now about half an hour before it starts to dry off. The front edge we don't need to do anything with, but this back edge we do need to trim. But I think I'm going to leave that back edge until it's almost dry, because if I try to do it wet, I think we are going to have problems. So I'm just going to put a little bit extra along that edge there. I think if I try and do it now, it will just tear. So if it's a really good quality tissue, like the Japanese Asuka tissue that we get from Mike Woodhouse, you know, I'd probably think about trimming it now, but this, no way. So we'll come back and have a look when it's started to dry, or it's dried. Right, well this is starting to dry now, and something that we need to be very aware of is that as this dries, we've also got this where it's being wet drying, and you can see the tension in it now as it's starting to shrink. So what we need to do is we need to just relieve that, or it's going to alter it's going to start pulling it on the top or off the top. So I'm just going to put in some longitudinal slits with a scalpel like this. Just, you can see here it's pulling. So that's all we need to do, and that will sort it out. It's still looking nice, and I still keep seeing the odd little bit of a bubble, or a kind of a little bit lifted, and I'm just keep making sure it's okay. So, right, I better get on and put these slots in. Right, you can see this is starting to look really nice. Still damp, still tacky, but it's time to start cutting this, because this is starting to dry out, so it's getting a little bit of strength. Now you can use a scalpel. I'm going to use a razor blade, which I've just broken in half and stuck to a bit of balsa, and just going to go along the top side of this. Somebody told me recently in a comment on one of my videos I should be using razors for this, and to be honest, they're absolutely right. It is a lot easier. You can still do it with a scalpel, but that is doing such a nice job. So thank you to the person who said that to me. It's a long time since I've used razors for this this type of work. So I will carry on and just get this done all around here, and then we can leave this to dry, and when it is dry I'll be moving on to doing this section. So I want to get both these done today. I can leave it overnight, and then tomorrow I can start on the top surface. Right, well this is more or less dry now. It's dry to the touch anyway. I'm sure it does need to dry a little bit more, but it's looking absolutely lovely. I'm really pleased with how that's gone on. It does bleed a little bit. It's very, very slightly water soluble, this blue, but it doesn't really make any difference. We will need to be careful when we're putting the green onto the blue on the top, just to make sure that that we don't spread the colour, but I'm not sure if the green is slightly water soluble as well, but it's very, very slight. But anyway, you can see that is looking great. So I'm going to get the other side done now, and then we can let this dry overnight. Right, well this has had plenty of time to dry now, and it's come out absolutely gorgeous. I'm really pleased with how it's looking, and I'm looking forward to getting the covering on the top now. I think I mentioned it earlier, but this blue seems to have bled a little bit. It seems to be just a little bit water soluble, the colour in it. I don't remember the black that I used on my Keil Kraft Gypsy being like that. And the green that I'm going to put on here, I've tested, I soaked that bit of tissue in water for a couple of hours and then stuck it on this bit of card with the polyurethane, and that hasn't bled, so it looks like it might be just the blue. So because I was slightly worried about how the green was going to go on and whether that would lose a little bit of colour into this blue, but I've got my bits of tissue cut now, and I'm going to get these on kind of in that configuration, and then I've got a piece of green over here which I think I need to recut because it needs to be just a tad longer, but that essentially, I did show this earlier on, but that is then going to go onto the front edge like that. So I think the blue will go on nice and easy. Might be a little bit trickier with the green, but we'll see. So I'm going to get this put on, the blue, exactly the same as I did for the underside, and then we'll have a look at it and we'll get that green on. Right, quick update. I got this on, I've got the polyurethane on, and I'm just making sure that this excess here now is hanging down and not clinging to the underside of the wing, which that little bit there was. And once it's dried off, I'll just get the scalpel on and just run that off, cut that off, sorry. But just want to make sure, like I say, it's not sort of lapping under and sticking, which this piece seems to keep doing. So I might just hang a paper clip on there or something, just to keep the weight on it if that goes back again. So anyway, we'll have a look once we're lining up the next piece. Right, well, I'm about to start putting this second piece on. This is still just a little bit tacky, but it's more or less done, and I'm happy to move on. I just will make sure I don't spray any water on it. It's nice that they're separated. Now, to line this up, I've tried to get it exactly the same as that, and I'm using the ribs, the spars, to line it up. So this kind of crosses the 7th rib, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and this is about the same, a little bit of difference, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so, and the same distance here. So hopefully that is more or less right now. To be honest, once it's covered, and you know, we won't notice if there's slight differences, but we want to try and get it as accurate as possible. And to be honest, once we've got this wet and the tissue expands and we've lifted it up to get the wrinkles out, it'll probably move a little bit more, but hey ho, we'll do the best we can with this. I've got a bean bag on here, one my daughter made at school, I think, and it's really useful for just holding it nice and steady on the wing while I line it up, because it does have a propensity to slide all over the place. But let's take this off so we don't get it wet. I've got a couple of bean bags and I find them more and more useful in the workshop for just that kind of application. Right, so we'll get this done. Now, I thought it was worth making just a quick comment on this. I had a few issues because I got some wrinkles in it, and it's quite a difficult shape to lift up and put down, lift up and put down. And I did lift it up and put it down, reposition it several times, and I was still ending up with some wrinkles, and I didn't want to pull it because of the wet strength of this it's okay, it's passable, but it's not, as I've said, it's not a patch on the Asuka Japanese tissue. But if you really flood the tissue with just, you can see here, it's absolutely swimming, it more or less floats on the laminating film, and you can see here, you can just move the whole thing more or less on a bed of water, you know, and it doesn't really matter how much, to my mind, it doesn't matter how much water you put on, because at the end of the day, when we've got this sorted, which we almost have now, I'm going to dab all this and dry it off so that it'll be fine to put the polyurethane on. So if you've got a wrinkle that's really difficult, just try putting on a huge amount of water and just like I've done here and just floating it. There's a couple of very slight creases here where I think the tissue is creased, but I think those will come out as it starts to dry and shrink, which it does do. But I thought it was worth just making that point because I literally got to the point where I thought I can't lift this up again because I'm going to rip it. And I did just take out the corner a little bit, which doesn't matter because it's not a piece that we're going to have on the final thing. But I just thought, right, time to flood it. So I'll get on. Right, well, you can see now I've got the blue on the top and I'm really pleased with how it's looking so far. And it's dry to the touch, more or less. This side still feels slightly damp, I guess. But anyway, I'm going to leave this now until tomorrow, and I might even go flying tomorrow, and so I might leave it a couple of days just to make sure this is really dry and it's not going to be affected when I start spraying it, possibly with copious amounts of water to get the green on. So I want to be sure that we don't do any damage to what we've done already. So we'll come back and we'll have a look when this is nice and dry and get the green on. Right, well, this blue has dried now and it's, just get that off, and it's looking lovely, really nice, really pleased with it. Not a crease, a wrinkle or anything, just really nice. Now what I'm going to do is put on the green, and I've trimmed it so it is exactly on the centre line of the wing where the two pieces of balsa in this centre section meet. Now I'm assuming that when we wet this it's going to expand, so it will go over that centre line by just a few mil, and if I do the same on the other side, hopefully then we'll just get a very narrow seam on that centre section. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time just making sure, and using my bean bags, just making sure that we get this in the right place, and then I'll put it on in exactly the same way with the water as I did with everything else. We'll come back and see how we're getting on with that. Right, a quick update. This has just got the water on it now, and you can see it's quite wet, and I'm just making sure we're getting out all of the major wrinkles. These little ones, kind of micro creases, wrinkles, whatever, aren't a problem because I'm fairly sure they will disappear as soon as we start to put the polyurethane on. And in fact, you may be able to see a lot of them are just disappearing now as I'm just brushing them. It's quite a nice tissue, this is quite forgiving. Did I say this is just the water? I think I did. So what I'm going to do now is leave this for a little bit, a few minutes, and then I'm going to dab it off and we'll get the polyurethane on. Right, well, we're definitely on the home stretch with this now. You can see we've got all of the tissue on. Some of the overlaps, the seams, perhaps could have been a little bit more even, but this tissue was quite difficult because it was quite long, thin, and as I said before, the wet strength isn't fantastic. But on the whole, I'm really pleased with how it's looking. So all we've got to do now is give this a couple of final coats, and I'm about to give it the second coat because at this point you can see it looks a little bit patchy, and you can see there it's a little bit patchy. Now where I've given it two coats, you can see the gloss which I'm using has really brought the colour out. This is a Wilko polyurethane, water-based polyurethane. I think I said earlier that it was Wix. It's not, as you can see on the tin, it's Wilko. Now I'm going to give this a second coat of the gloss because, like I said, I just think that looked quite nice the way that brought out the colour. So I'm going to do that, but one thing I want to do first is to go over particularly these ends and around the seams. If you run your hand around, you can feel the odd sort of blip or a little bit sticking out. Now the end of that hopefully Let's just come around. Hopefully that's in focus. But you can see there's some quite decent creases there where the tissue has not gone round particularly well. And all we need to do is get a hot iron, and I've got this on about 130, and we're just going to go around and iron all these areas, and it will just help seal that down, push it down and flatten it out and smooth it out. The heat sort of softens the polyurethane. It might be that the laminating film underneath is sticking up a little bit creased. So if we go around all the edges like this, it just neatens it up a little bit. I wouldn't recommend doing it on the open surfaces because we could introduce wrinkles and all kinds of problems, but certainly on the edges, on the seams, then I think it's well worth doing. So I'll get on and do this, and then we'll get this second coat on. Right, well, I've now got this wing finished. I've got it with 2 coats on both the bottom and the top, and I'm really pleased with how it's looking. It's it's a little bit more glossy than I was perhaps expecting. I mean, I could always put a thin coat of matte on that to tone it down a little bit, but I think it'll look fine. And to be honest, with a diesel engine, it'll clean a lot easier with a gloss surface. But I'm really pleased with it because the gloss has brought out the colour, which wouldn't have been there quite so much with a matte finish. Anyway, we've got the wing done. Still feels nice and light, so I'm really pleased. I'm going to draw this video to a close now, and I apologise for the length. These covering videos always end up a little bit longer than I would have liked, but it does take so many different stages. And I know I haven't shown all of the top wing, but I did show the process for the underside, and the techniques for the top is exactly the same. So in the next video, I think we're going to have to be working on this tailplane and getting this elevator built into this so that we can have rudder and elevator control. But anyway, I'm going to pull it to a close now. So thanks very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. Please come back, see how we get on with the elevator.